Hello and welcome to today's Power of Knowing webinar, Coping with Loss During the Holidays. Understanding comes from knowing. The holiday season can be a joyous time for most, but can also be a difficult time for many who are navigating the festivities while coping with grief. Many feel overwhelmed by expectations of the season and are uncertain about how to make changes to make it more manageable. This webinar will provide practical ideas like creating new routines, rituals, or plans, focusing on what is possible and preserving traditions that provide the most comfort. We will also discuss how to be a supportive presence for those in your life who are experiencing grief during the holiday season. The Power of Knowing is a free webinar series created by AuthoriCare Collective, a nonprofit organization that empowers people to be active participants in their care journey, enabling them to live on their own terms through personalized support for mind, body, and spirit. My name is Paul Russ, and I am the Vice President of Marketing and Development for AuthoriCare Collective. Today, I will be facilitating our discussion, and Risa Hanow will serve as our content expert. Risa serves as clinical and community educator at AuthoriCare Collective and is also a member of the Cone Health Ethics Committee. She's a licensed clinical social worker. Welcome, Risa.
Thank you. Thank you.
One bit of housekeeping, too, I want to share for everybody is that we will be using the chat feature. If you have any questions, feel free to pop something in the chat or the Q&A. And Risa and I will be working through those and trying to answer as many questions as we can. So the holidays, they are right around the corner. They are upon us. They involve food, shopping, parties, families, pressures to be perfect, and they are just innately stressful, Risa. So add or layer onto that somebody who might be coping with a loss. That can be very difficult. And I thought maybe as a starting point, we might just throw out to you the question, what kinds of things should we be aware of or pay attention to that might indicate that our grief is affecting our ability to enjoy these seasons?
So I think the first thing is to acknowledge it. We so often in society just plow forward. I hear the expression, I have to, I'm supposed to, that's what we always do. And if we're able to take a breath in the midst of everything that's going on and recognize it does feel different. I don't feel quite as joyous. I'm not as eager to go down that aisle in the store that has set up the Christmas holiday displays already. When you begin to feel the pressure of, I have to do the cards rather than, I'm so excited to go and pick out the cards we're going to do this year. Really beginning to take a deep look at how does it feel? Slow down enough, recognize it, give yourself grace to accept that that's normal, and then name it. And let others know how you're feeling, because otherwise you're going to keep pushing it down and pushing it down, and that just adds to the stress that's already going on.
I recently had a loss myself, and a friend I think I was short with somebody, and they were asking me, is that because of your loss, or is that because of you're just tired today? Or they were asking, do you have a sense of where this is coming from? And I was wondering if there are any tips on what we should look for in those subconscious changes that occur. Because what you just described was very self-aware,
Yeah.
And sometimes we're not aware. Maybe our friends or our
Yeah.
spouses can tell us.
Right. And others might notice a change in our behavior. So the reality is that grief, whether it's because we lost someone like you, and I'm sorry for your loss,
Yeah.
or someone who has a loved one who is ill, or maybe you're dealing with an illness yourself. Grief is a normal process of having a loss, a change, and that impacts our entire body. So for some of us, it means that our sleep is disrupted. For some of us, it means that we can't get motivated to go to the gym. Others of us are running twice as far as we used to because we're trying to get away from it. Some of us have no tolerance for what we consider to be small talk or, somebody interrupting us when usually we're much calmer or easygoing. So I think that grief impacts us physically. It impacts the way we interact with the world. It impacts the way that we go about our day to day. And because we are in it, it might take that very gracious, thoughtful person, we hope, saying, "Hey, Paul, what's going on? That's not your usual." So it is the reality that when we are in the midst of something, it's hard to have perspective. And we can share with others what we're experiencing so they can help us and they can say, Paul, you seem a little off today. Do
Mhm.
you think it's because of what happened? And what can I do to be a support to you? And, sometimes people feel that they shouldn't show their emotion or they shouldn't share what has occurred with others. And what I've learned is that when you share your loss, I then feel comfortable sharing my experience. Yours is different than mine, but almost every person we encounter has had a loss and it's isolating. And you sharing gives me the opportunity to support you and then gives me the opportunity to at some point share with you my experience.
I think that something you just said too just triggered in my head that this talk today is not only about the person navigating through the holidays who has had a loss, but we talked about in the learning objectives and in the promotion that it would also be insightful for people who know somebody who's had a loss and how to be proactive. So while we're here at this top level of just introducing the landscape and the context, um, what are some of the ways somebody can offer that kind of gentle nudge? I mean, is there any advice or guidance on how to bring it up to say, Paul, maybe you're being affected?
Right. I think you want to be thoughtful about the relationship you have with that person. So is it someone that, you have shared directly about that loss, or did you hear it from three other people whisper down the lane? Maybe you want to be thoughtful about the relationship you have with that person. You want to do it in a private way so that you're not in a room full of people and say, "Hey, what's going on?" You want to be thoughtful that some people may feel either embarrassed or they may become emotional, and that's fine. We
Mhm.
want people to always feel supported and to say, "You shared with me, and it makes me wonder if." And so it's posing a question. It's not saying, "You're not grieving well." Want to raise the possibility because you might just say, "No, I just stubbed my toe and I'm in pain in this moment. I'm
Mhm.
fine." Right? So we don't want to make assumptions because that's the other thing. When somebody is grieving, those who are around them might start saying, oh, that's because, and making decisions on your behalf or saying, oh, we shouldn't bother him because. And we don't want to exclude people. We want to say, are you up for this? Tell
Mhm.
me what works for you, and have it be a conversation.
I mean, I think this question is loaded because I think whether you're grieving or not, how might we set more realistic expectations for the holidays? How can we begin that inventory and give ourselves that permission to do things differently?
Yeah. So I think that number one, it is the reality that you can make changes year to year. Now, we know that family tradition or friend tradition is very important. We also know that doing 125 individualized cards just might not be where we are. So it's thinking about what are the priorities? What is it that gives you strength? What is it that gives you hope? What is it if you want to have remembrance of somebody who may have died in the past year since the last holiday? So what is it that is really important? And being able to realistically share with others, whether it's in your family group or who you might gather with, what is possible. Because sometimes we hear, well, we do it every year, or of course you can. Just push through. It will be good for you. And at any point, being able to set a boundary and say, this year, I'm going to pass on that. Or this year, instead of having 12 pies, we're going to have 5. And it would be great if people could sign up to bring them, and I'll make one. So, it is a very individual choice of, do we want to preserve things exactly as they were because that gives me comfort? Or is it, I want to go to a restaurant this year? Or is it that I want to stay home and watch movies and read and stay under the comforter and explain to people that you are safe and you are thoughtful about it and it is what you want? So we can change, but we
Mhm.
need to share with people about it.
And again, we as supportive friends can set the stage for those possibilities to help the person explore those possibilities and or at least inquire what would you like to do, and give them permission to not do the same thing.
Right. And as a part of that, I would say, the phrase, if there's anything I can do, let me know. It's helpful when we can be specific. So if you're part of that group that usually gathers for whatever holiday or whatever you might be celebrating, if you know what the menu usually is, to offer to order in or offer to do some of the cooking. It can feel overwhelming for someone who's grieving, number one, to ask for help, and number two, to specifically identify something. So those who are in a support position to be able to say, I can do this. Would you like me to pick you up so you don't have to walk in by yourself? There are many options. And I also want to bring up that many times an entire family is grieving, right?
Mhm.
Because grandpa is not here and there are multiple children, multiple grandchildren. We need to recognize that we don't all grieve the same, even though we're in the same family or the same friend group. And we need to give space to let people find their path. So if they don't want to sit at the table, they're more comfortable sitting on the sofa during the meal. They don't want to say what they're grateful for, even though that's the family tradition. We have to, take the whole group and the impact into account, because this is an experience everyone might be having, but having it differently. And that can get complicated.
Yeah, I know that we've done several webinars about children, for example. Children experience their world differently than adults and will grieve differently. And that just last month we talked about that. So for those that are interested in grief with children, they can visit our website and look at last month's recording of grieving children. Unless there's something you want to add, especially here during the holidays, if you're
Well, I am thinking that there often is a lot of conversation. We have to fill in the blank. We have to put the tree up. We have to make the same potato latkes. We have to do the same tradition because the kids expect it. And while there is something lovely about that, and we know that routine for children can be very important, we also know that we can explain to children, depending on what their age is, why we're doing something different this year. Or is there something different they might like to do? Might they want to write a letter or a card to their loved one who has died? Or might they want to start a new tradition? So we can involve the children in these conversations and allow them to give their input.
Well, that's a great transition to a discussion about new traditions and ways to honor the past. How would somebody who's never experienced this before, though, where might they go for resources to explore creative ideas, ways to do that?
Yeah. So sometimes it's within a faith tradition. So many of us who are a part of a faith tradition have certain rituals.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that during grief, rituals can be very comforting for people. And so it might be that either around an illness, we can't have our loved one join us in the same way. We start a ritual of remembrances, even though that person can't be remembering themselves. So we can start a tradition of carrying that generation to generation, those family stories. So looking within a faith tradition for a ritual, we can look to nature for rituals. This time of the year, thinking about such things as planting a tree, or having a new fruit, or having an activity that takes us outside. Perhaps it's going to a graveside, perhaps it's going to a special park bench, involving nature as a part of a ritual. Oftentimes people use candles or light as a part of a ritual, and that can be very, very powerful. And so we can, look to our traditions, either within our families, our friend groups. We can look within our faith, and we can also look, quite frankly, about what gives us comfort. There are so many ways to create ritual. And think about what already is done as a ritual, and then see if you want to adjust it in some way. So it is the ritual that there is the going around the table and saying what we give thanks for. This year, maybe we want to change it and use the loved one's name who has died and say what we remember about them, and give people permission to pass if they're not comfortable doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many ways of doing that. And remembering that this is 1 year. Next year, you can decide to do it differently. Beginning a ritual, we go into it thinking, oh, we'll do this forever. But we know that we have permission that by next year we could be in a different place and we might want to do something different. And that's fine.
Lovely. You also just reminded me that our Light Up a Life service is coming up, and it's the 40th annual Light Up a Life service on December 8th. And that is, well, I'll put information about that in the follow-up email for folks that might want to attend. But as you described new events that become ritual, it reminded me of the many people that have come over the years to Light Up a Life, first initiated by a loss that year, but then coming to the service annually has become a new ritual that they have continued. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this service, it's an ecumenical service. It is a candle lighting service to celebrate the lives that we've lost. And our keynote speakers always um, challenge to provide us a message that will help us prepare our hearts and minds for the empty seat at the table during the holiday season as we enter this first
Right.
year of loss.
And it allows us to gather. So somebody who has attended that service as a member of the AuthoriCare Collective staff, there is a warmth and there is a tradition of seeing the same people, but then seeing new people entering into that space. It's also very different. The years that I went following the deaths of each of my parents, that service took on a different meaning for me because I was emotionally in a different space and I absorbed it differently. I was a participant. I was really seeking the comfort of others. I was really wanting to hear the strength from the speakers and the warmth of the light. And I think that, gathering is something I have gone with friends who say, I might cry. And it's very simple to say, oh, don't worry about it, because people do worry about it. It is also the truth that it's in a natural expression. And when we are in a space with others who have a common experience, there's safety in that. And so when we can find those opportunities, like Light Up a Life, like gathering in a group of perhaps others who have had a similar loss, or others that we are able to share our feelings with, that helps us not only heal, but express ourselves and find comfort and give comfort.
Exactly. How does one navigate the fumbles? Either I'm the caring friend and I put my foot in my mouth,
Yeah.
or I'm the grieving person and somebody really puts their foot in their mouth with me. What are ways that we can navigate those awkward situations and be authentic and hopefully helpful?
So the reality is none of us are perfect, for as much as we want to be, and people don't set out to be hurtful. And yet we can say things that can be hurtful. We can make an assumption that somebody celebrates a holiday and they celebrate a different holiday, or they don't celebrate. And so making a statement like, oh, this Christmas must be really awful since your mother died. Well, A, I don't celebrate Christmas, and B, it wasn't my mother, it was my father. I would want to sink through the floor, right?
Mhm.
So we want to be thoughtful about what we say. Maybe we say, I'm wondering how this time of the year is for you since the loss of your parent, if I'm not absolutely sure. But when we do step into it, we can say, please accept my apology. I am sorry. And tell me about your mother. What was her name? Um, because it happens. We cannot all remember each person's experience, and to genuinely apologize and take responsibility. But once we apologize, then continue on and ask a question. Tell me about your loved one. Tell me what you do celebrate. Do you celebrate this time of the year? So we can recover. We are human. We are going to say things that somebody else might bristle at, either because I said mother instead of father, or because they are in a space of feeling uncomfortable and they might not react the way we expect. Which brings us to the griever. It is exhausting to grieve. It is sometimes I want to curl up in a ball and put the blanket over my head, and I just don't want to deal with the day-to-day world. And then you're asking me these intrusive questions and just leave me alone. And I think we can give ourselves permission to say, I appreciate your question. It's not a good time for me to talk right now. We don't have to answer every question. And we can also prepare ourselves. When somebody says, how are you? You can say fine if in that moment you don't want to get into it, or it's not somebody you have a relationship with that you want to show your emotions or you want to share. Sometimes the griever might say, do you want me to tell you? Do you want me to explain? Because it is a burden sometimes that people take on when they hear someone's story. And so everyone needs to be thoughtful and gracious. What we want to try to avoid saying is, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Well, let me write and start telling your story on top of their story.
Mhm.
Or telling them what I did was, and that's what you ought to do. We want to create space for people to tell their story, to correct us if they want to go into detail if they want to, but not push them if they don't want to.
Um, I think that there's an example in there of that creating a possibility that we don't want to talk over somebody by just telling them what our experience was, but sometimes we can share our experience and say it might be helpful. I share this with you because um, you might consider something similar, but it might not be the right fit for you. But giving that permission is
Right?
definitely
It's the possibility. I
it's the
know that
delivery.
when my mother died, what was helpful for us was, or I've known a number of families who have decided to go to a restaurant instead of going to the house. Or I know the first year my loved one was in a residential care facility, we went to visit and then we came back for the meal. That might be a way that would work for your family. So we can give people ideas, and people often benefit and really want to know, oh, I'm not alone. You've done this before. How did it work for you? And so we can share it. I think sometimes it's the words that we use, the timing, the space, the middle of the, store might not be the place, but the private moment standing at the car in the parking lot might be the moment.
Are there are there ways to inventory? Like I'm trying to think of proactive. I'm going to this dinner. I'm going to this party. What are the kinds of things that we should think through? I should have an excuse to leave prepared. I
Yeah.
should have what are some any tips along those lines for how to navigate these settings
So I think
proactively?
if we accept an invitation, we should always give ourselves permission at the last minute to change our mind. If we were sick, right, we had 103 and a stomach bug, we wouldn't go. And if we are not emotionally at a space to walk into a huge cocktail party with music and people milling around, even though we thought we would, it's okay to, at the last moment, let somebody know. It's also okay to have a plan to get out, an escape plan. And maybe it's a partner. It's, Paul, if you see me, you know, doing this 3 times in a row, it means, can we please leave? Or, letting somebody know when you accept the invitation. I'm still a little fragile. This is the first big party I've gone to. I want to come, and I'm not sure how long I'm going to be able to stay. So we can be honest about that. And we can, again, think about, is this a work setting? Is this an intimate group of our friends? Those things matter about how we prepare. We can go into a more large group with people that we don't know, prepared and steeled just to say, I'm good, how are you? And keep on moving. And then with that more intimate group, we can sit and we can say, wow, I'm glad I came and I need to take a deep breath, because when we're grieving, sometimes we don't feel like it's okay to laugh. We don't feel like it's okay to celebrate. And we can grieve, and that doesn't mean that we're not missing our loved one if we kick our heels up and have a really good time. And so I think that's the other part of the holidays, is that there's the pressure to perform in a certain way. But if I laugh, if I have a good time, if I'm excited by the shopping or getting the new outfit or traveling, then do I feel guilty? And that's the other place where we want to give ourselves grace, because we are still here. Yes, our loved one might be in that residential care facility and can't come with us this year. And we acknowledge that's very difficult. And I can still have the right to enjoy myself. Both can be true at the same time. And so, again, we want to be thoughtful and we want to be gentle with ourselves. And we want to recognize not everyone in the same family is going to make the same choices. And that doesn't mean that they're not missing or they didn't love the person, or and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Well, and I also think that when emotions are raw, um, we also it brings out the best and the worst of ourselves, right? It gives us the opportunity to show up both ways. So that cousin that always got on your nerves, it was probably going to get on your nerves even more this time.
Right.
Um, and not intentionally, it's just the way that it happens. And you went right into that part about guilt. I was thinking about that as you were speaking before you said it, and primarily with kids. I was thinking that sometimes children feel guilty about playing, or when everything in their life is so heavy. Um, and was wondering about, are there ways to I don't know, have a confidant that you talked about the guilt, and I was thinking, where would I put that? So is journaling about that, is having a close confidant where you can say, I feel guilty, but I really want that glass of wine and I want to dress up, or what are some of the tips to help you navigate and place that guilt?
So what I always think about is what has given you comfort in the past. So if journaling is a place where you really, over time or at times of difficulty, have used journaling to express yourself because you like that private space where you can pour out your feelings and you can say, I feel guilty. I don't want people thinking I didn't love him. And nobody's going to answer you back, right? So journaling is a wonderful, and for some people, they like to write or type, and there's even something therapeutic about that action when we're grieving. And so that can be wonderful. And then who are the people in our lives? Sometimes it's a professional counselor, because that professional counselor, whether it's somebody here at a ThoraCare Collective or somebody that we have already in our lives, that professional counselor is that neutral person that we can speak openly to, that we can kind of problem solve with. And so that's a consideration. And then we have, I have a wonderful reading, and it talks about the different friends in our lives. And some friends are the people who, no matter what you have on, are going to say, oh, that looks great. And then you have other friends that are going to say, Risa, really, I don't think you ought to do that. And then we have other friends who are the cheerleaders. You can do it. You can do it. And then we have other friends who are those who will sit in a quiet space and be present. And so we want to think about who it is we need in that moment. We might want the person saying, come on, you can do it. You can put the dress on. You can go to the party. I'm going to walk alongside of you. And for the first time out, that might be really important. And then that person who will sit with us and allow us to pour out our feelings of guilt, not pass judgment, not tell us what we ought to do, be with us, journey with us, stay with us. One of the greatest gifts that people can give someone who's grieving, particularly at this time of the year when time is so limited for everyone, is to be with, to sit with someone, even if it is in silence, to go and help and wrap the gifts so the kids do have something to open, to, offer to stand in the kitchen while the recipe that is made every prior year by the person who isn't here any longer. There are so many ways that we can both personally address our grief, our anger, our confusion, and invite other people in. And then we can be supports to those people. Because again, most of us have walked on both sides of the street. It doesn't mean that my grief is exactly the same as yours, but I know what it feels like to have someone with me.
I think that lesson of being present is incredibly valuable, and I, in my years working here, I've heard it many times. Even in Patrick the dog over at Beacon Place, that was the lesson of Patrick, for a longtime volunteer who was nervous about visiting patients, and but I do believe that it's valuable to follow that advice, but it can be scary for the supportive person. It can be scary to be present because you're not a therapist and I don't know what to say and I'm afraid I'm going to make it worse. And any advice for the layperson who's just trying to be a good friend?
Yeah, I think that in general, the saying that we have one mouth and two ears, and we should listen more than we speak, because for many people, they are looking for someone who will stay by their side. And particularly around this season, that is so laden with expectations and so laden with activity and so laden with all of these societal pressures to carve out 15 minutes, 30 minutes, a supportive text, something to let somebody know that there is a presence, that you are holding them close, that you are available if you want to speak, and I am fine if now's not the time that you want to speak. And, being that person walking alongside, some of us aren't equipped to sit in the space with somebody who's crying and telling the story, but I might be able to go do the grocery shopping, or I might be able to go and help, clean the house before the guests arrive. So there are many ways for us to be helpful, particularly this time of the year. I can remember the first year when the holidays were coming after my father had died. We had a tradition of being on the phone together to do a certain ritual. And I had two friends who came over and did it with me instead, because they knew that was important to me. Were they my father? No, but they cared enough to say, tell me how it went and we will do it with you. So for adults and children, offer that support. We can offer to take the child to, if going to Santa Claus is an important thing, but you aren't personally up for it this year, a friend can offer to do that if you know that that's important. A friend can offer to take the child shopping or to go to the school event. There are so many ways, and oftentimes we feel paralyzed by the fear, which is why today is great. We have a couple of weeks. We can start thinking about, do we want to do it the same way? Do we want to do it differently? What might I offer? We have some time here. And when we prepare, that doesn't mean we won't be caught off guard by an emotion, and that's fine, but we have some time and we can begin the message of giving ourselves permission and exploring, maybe a restaurant is an interesting idea, or maybe going to somebody else's house is an interesting idea, or find out what the possibilities are at the work. So we can begin now to prepare and think about and share with others, particularly in that family or friend group, what you're thinking about, because somebody else might have a totally different idea. And you don't want to wait till you sit down at the table to find out that you sat Aunt Martha at the head of the table instead of leaving that chair empty, right? So good to have these conversations sooner. And it can be difficult. So we want to start sooner and be gentle.
You've brought up a loved one in a care facility as an example a couple of times, and so I want to thank you for doing that and acknowledge that not all loss is due to a death, that we are often experiencing losses of routine and change as our loved ones age, and they might be in a memory unit or they might be in a care facility and not be able to participate as they had traditionally. So we acknowledge that, and that is a similar, or it's a loss that is can affect our holidays. We've talked a lot about being a good friend, being a family member, being somebody who's grieving, and how I can serve and serve myself. What are some of the signs that that's not enough? And what are some of the professional resources that are available that would be beneficial to people?
Right. I want to go back to what you said about the people in a care facility or somebody ill just for a second, because We want to recognize that there can be family coming in from out of town, and we haven't seen someone for perhaps a year, and there might be significant changes. And I might have been told it, but seeing it can be very different. So part of that preparation might be, mom will be at the house, but she can't do the cooking this year, and we have the bed in the living room, right? So be thoughtful about those who are coming in from out of town, maybe not having seen someone who is going through an illness, or if it is a memory, a dementia issue, making sure that others understand so they are not taken off guard, because that can be very, very difficult. And, for that family coming in from out of town to deal with that. And so then transitioning into how do we know when it is that I might be concerned about a loved one or about myself. So grieving is normal. Grieving is not an illness. Grieving is not a disease. It is also the case that sometimes when people are grieving, they can have issues that would be benefited by a professional. And so if we think about somebody who has not gotten out of bed for multiple days in a row, we're seeing somebody who's usually very well groomed and their clothes is disheveled and they are not, looking themselves. Mm-hmm. If they are speaking possibly about, harming themselves, we want to take emergency action. So there is a phone number that everyone can call, 988, which is an emergency number. So if you are ever, especially over the holidays when there's a, increase in stress, we want people to know that they can call an emergency number for assistance. You can also encourage people to follow up with their physicians. Some people have had their sobriety very well in check for many, many months, many days, many years. The coupling of holidays and grief can be something that can challenge us. So we might want to offer to go to an extra meeting with someone. We might want to offer to go to an appointment with someone. Seeing a change in behavior that is not just one day of crying, but it is weeks of not participating, noticing weight loss, not being able to engage in daily life, because we can grieve and still continue on with many aspects of our life. That's when either I want to myself recognize I need to reach out to that bereavement service that was offered at AthoriCare 6 months ago when my loved one died and everything was okay, but now it doesn't feel okay. And I want to go ahead and make that phone call. Or I want to, as a caring friend or family member, say, I'm concerned about you. And can we think about getting someone for you to speak to? Or if it's an emergent situation, then either taking action immediately to make sure that people are safe. And again, not just for adults, but thinking about our children. So we want to look for changes in behavior. We want to listen if somebody is questioning why are they still alive, particularly around this time of the year. There are a lot of emotions we miss, we want to be with. And again, that conversation can be hard for somebody to listen to, but if somebody is safe and expressing themselves, but at the point that you are worried for someone's safety or seeing a change in behavior, that's when we want to really think about having a professional involved.
And how does one go about finding those professionals? You mentioned AuthoriCare's complement of services. What is available?
Right. So for people who might be receiving hospice services from AuthoriCare Collective, there are social workers and chaplains and children's counselors. And so there's a built-in team of support. And we, want to be really honest and open with that team or any other care team that is involved. If we have already experienced the death of a loved one, we can call AuthoriCare Collective, or if we are out of the service area, we can either call AuthoriCare and we can help locate another bereavement source, or we might have a pre-existing counselor that can be helpful. We can also turn, if we have a primary care provider, maybe we have a relationship there and they might guide us. For some people, it is going to be within their faith community, finding solace and resources within their faith community. And there are a number of support groups that are available. And so it's really sometimes thinking about what is most meaningful for you, what has been helpful in the past, if you've had a past experience, and knowing that if you were to call AuthoriCare Collective and what we were to offer isn't exactly what you want, we can be thoughtful and share other resources.
I would imagine EAP, for example, might be.
Or if we are working, we can think about EAP or a counseling resource through our job. I was going to say people are concerned often about a charge. If we are working, somebody can look at if they're going to seek private counseling, see who is covered within an insurance network. But there are resources through AuthoriCare, through the Mental Health Society, through different organizations that can provide counseling. Some people gravitate towards a faith-based counseling resource, which is very helpful, a 12-step model. So it's really individual, but the first step, I think, is for me to say, having some additional support or having that person in my life say, Risa, I think it might be helpful if.
And that variety of different types of support also triggers in my head that sometimes you have to play Goldilocks. You try on a workshop, it's not for you, but maybe one of the other opportunities for support might be a better fit, and not to give up on looking for that right fit.
Right. And it is, we are at different places at different times. Mm-hmm. And so it is that natural reality that what works for me might not work for you, or what worked for me when I had a loss 6 years ago isn't going to be as helpful. Because when we think about grief, it has a lot to do with how long ago was it, right? For when we think about this holiday season, was my loss, 10 months ago or 10 days ago? What was the loss? Was it anticipated? It was a loss after a lengthy illness, or was it very sudden? Was there some trauma involved? And so we want to think about, that can give us some guidance sometimes, especially this time of the year. We might just be too exhausted to do something, but could use some good support. And recognize that, some people feel that there's a stigma in reaching out for support, utilizing counseling. What I would say, of course, I have a bias, this is what I've done, but I have seen it for, 30 years, the benefit of being with, and the benefit of not only having friends and family and faith community for those that is meaningful, but also that professional counselor when we are at a place where we just can't seem to find our way forward. And this time of the year, especially, it's getting dark early, and I feel overwhelmed. It might be the time to reach out.
With our Power of Knowing webinars, we always follow up with an email. And so tomorrow, all of our participants will receive the follow-up email that includes a link to the recording of this webinar, but it'll also have a couple of resources in it. One of them is a Grief During the Holidays toolkit, a real simple outline from our ThorCare website. It will be a link. But there was also one that we pulled together from the Alzheimer's Association. Do you want to spend just a moment describing what people will can expect in that?
Yeah, that is a wonderful resource. It is something that talks about preparing, making changes, explaining to others who might come over about a loved one's behaviors. It's a lovely guide. It gives a lot of information, a lot of ideas, so we can say yes, yes, no, yes. We can go through, and it has very good topics in terms of helping us prepare going into these coming weeks. And it also has a telephone number and the website where you can get more support on top of what that guide that's specific to grief and dealing with dementia during the holiday season. So it's a really lovely piece.
Great, thank you. Our Power of Knowing webinar will again has been recorded, and just wanted to remind everybody that you can learn or find our complete library of our Power of Knowing past presentations at authoricare.org/knowing. We are going to take the month of December off, but we'll be returning in January with a new 3-part series on caregiving. And so I encourage you to watch your emails for information about that as we go into the new year. Reese says we're winding down. Do you have any final thoughts or words of advice for our audience?
I think I would say that we should all give ourselves the same grace that we would give others this time of the year. And remember that no is a complete sentence.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on behalf of the ThorCare Collective, and hope that you all have a lovely holiday season. And if you are coping with a loss, that you found some comfort today and some advice and tips that will help you navigate this season and find meaning and help you work through it and be able to be present for yourself and your loved ones as well. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.